Welcome back to another episode of the Gifted Performance Podcast. If you haven't already, make sure to like the video and subscribe for future content. For more information about our one-on-one coaching and other training or nutrition options, visit giftedperformance.com. Our newest feature, the Gifted Express, offers premium programming for bodybuilders, powerlifters, Olympic weightlifters, and lifestyle clients for only $30 a month. Enjoy the video, we'll see you on the next one, and as always, stay gifted. Welcome back. Another Q&A episode of the GPP, answering questions that give you the knowledge and practical takeaway to improve your own general physical preparedness. The four familiar faces here. We got Paul.
Hi.
You didn't even recognize him. Take the glasses off again. One more time. Take them off. Who the fuck is that?
It's
Put
a
them
new
on.
guest, I think. Maybe.
Whoa. Who is this guy?
Yeah, honorary guest here checking in. Just
and
kidding.
Of course, we've got Jay. Whoa, Paul's back. Oh, man, that got scary there for a second. I didn't know who that guy was. We got Jason, the Holt. How you doing?
I can't complain.
As of recording this, current leader in the fantasy football league. Would you like to make any official statements?
You just wish you knew what a
surprised?
corn dog tasted like, right? You're like, fuck, I haven't had a corn. I just want a corn dog. It's been so long.
Are we surprised? I told you guys I came here to build a website and win the fantasy football league.
And that's it.
And you're all out of websites to build.
I'm all out of websites to build.
And then Dom, speaking of corn dogs, Dom, your daughter, she owes us 18 corn dogs. What's
my daughter?
Yes. You have to claim her.
I don't know. She's flaking hard on those.
Man,
Yeah.
shout out
She should
to
have
Jess
already,
Lee.
dude. By the time she got done complaining, she could have finished 5 of them.
Easily.
You gotta text her
Easily.
like after this and just tell her you're just so disappointed in her.
Not mad.
Disgrace.
Just disappointed.
Jess
She
Lee, I
asked
know
me to come watch in case she like dies or something.
Like, no, text her and tell her you're ashamed of her.
Oh, that'll be
Yeah,
sad.
I know. That's the
I think
point.
that-
show up for them
maybe
corn
we-
dogs, Jess Lee. Show up for them corn dogs.
Yeah, keep showing up to eat your corn dogs. All right, let's hit these questions here. Our first question of the day, and it is an absolute S-tier pumper juicer of a question. It comes from @Prince_Disney, the heir to the Disney throne. So I don't even know why this guy cares about training because he's going to be so rich one day. He asks, how much would you vary volume progression in someone who trains to failure from the start of a mesocycle versus someone who begins a meso training to 3 to 4 RIR? So two different individuals here. One individual A, lifter A, starts their mesocycle training to failure and progresses somehow. And then there is lifter B, who begins the meso training to 3 to 5 RIR, and I'm assuming that their progression model is descending reps in reserve. So starting at 3 to 5 RIR, working your way down to 0 to 1 RIR. So how would you vary the volume progression between lifter A and lifter B? Failure Fred and RIR Randy.
That got my adrenaline going. I don't know if it's all the stims or like my heart rate is pumping. No, but I think like the first question we would have to ask ourselves would be why would it be different, right? So like theoretically, and this is theoretically, I don't even necessarily agree with what I'm about to say, but theoretically, like what is the advantage of training to failure? Hopefully to try and get a similar stimulus or a really good stimulus with fewer sets than shy of failure. That's like literally the only reason. The only potential, maybe theoretical advantage is to try and get a good stimulus and less sets. So when we think of it that way, it really shouldn't be different, right? It would be the same if you needed to escalate sets, which is a whole nother question, is do we even need to do that? Do we need to progress number of sets, right? But like if you were going to compare the two, it should in theory be similar, just to a smaller scale, right? Does that make sense?
So So theoretically, for the person who trains to failure, what is the volume progression for them? What is the progression model for someone who is training to failure from the start of a mesocycle? Because for someone who's using RIR, you can use descending RIRs and add 1 to 2 reps per set, and then that provides your volume progression. Are we adding sets for the person to failure?
I mean,
I don't know. That's a
so
weird
I
question.
don't have an answer for that, but it's interesting that you bring that up because you do end up losing a tool of overloading progressively, right? When you take every single set to failure. So that really only leaves you with, you can add load, but then you do lose
Your
out.
reps will come down.
Yeah. And then, like adding sets would if you felt like you needed to increase your volume, and I guess it depends on which definition of volume you're using, because just because sets come down, if you're counting volume by effective reps or effective volume, your effective reps and volume may not be coming down, right?
Yeah.
I
I have a client I do this with. He doesn't like using RIR to not that he doesn't like using it. He doesn't like the 4s, the 5s, intro week stuff. So his mesocycle just starts at 1 to 2, and which I guess, yeah, I mean, he doesn't start training to failure, but he's starting at a 1 to 2 RIR, and then the next week, I just tell him to beat reps if he can and get closer to 1 than 2. And then the third week, we'll increase load a little bit. But that's 3 weeks of the same volume, set volume. That's the same set volume for 3 weeks. And then the fourth week, he'll push to quote-unquote failure. And that, if I feel the need to add volume through sets, I'll give him a back-off set at the end of all those failure sets, where he kind of can just drop load a little bit and go a little bit further. But I think Paul makes a good point, because in my opinion, if you're training to failure so much and to true failure, you really shouldn't need to increase volume that much over the course of that time. But then you have 2 different aspects of progressive overload that you can't use, because one, you might not be able to handle more volume, because if you're truly training to failure, you might just be battered from it. You're not going to get effective reps if you do another set. You might just turn to junk volume at that point. And then we can't, if failure is where we're going, then there's no way to control that too.
That is it. I think that's a really good point that you brought up, is that if you are taking all of your sets to failure, you only have so much room for good volume or effective volume, because more quickly you are going to run into that point of diminishing returns where adding an extra set is junk volume.
Yeah.
I just think, how long is this mesocycle going to be comparatively between both protocols?
Yeah.
I feel like if you're training to failure, how much of that mesocycle is going to be decent volume, like you guys brought up? Eventually, it's probably going to be pretty shitty towards the end. Oh, we didn't even make it to 10 minutes. Did we?
Dang it.
That's my
We'll bleep
fault.
that out.
Start all over
It's
again.
in the Bible. That's not a bad word.
Okay.
Oh, yeah, true.
That's true. That's true.
We're big Bible thumpers here at the Gifted Performance Podcast.
Absolutely. But I think, how long is this? Just because you can't really vary volume that much, unless, which is often the case, the person says they're training to failure, but they're really not training to failure. That's also something to kind of take into account is often when someone says they're training to fail, is there somebody there catching the bar for them or catching the dumbbell because they've failed, or are they right before? Most of the time when someone says they're training to failure, they're really training to 1 RIR, because they're often training by themselves.
If that.
Yeah, if that. Because we all go through that same progression where we kind of go, oh shit, this is heavy. See, I did it again, but it's in the Bible. But, we kind of think, I'm getting close to failure. This is starting to get heavy, and we stop. And even the research kind of shows this. Most people stop far before they've actually even gotten close to failure. So that would be my first question is often you can probably actually vary volume a little bit because the person's really not training to failure. Someone that's truly training to failure probably won't survive 2 or 3 weeks of making any actual progress because they're just banging their head up against a wall.
For most, I would say that failure probably means like technical failure as opposed to like true concentric like failure. Like
Maybe not even that. Maybe we should call it training to high discomfort.
Yeah. I like
oh,
that.
this is scary.
I like that. Last week we talked about intent. We're creating our own word now, training to high levels of discomfort. That's the new t-shirt.
Like I tell people just like mechanical failure. Like once your form goes to shit, why even bother doing another rep after that point?
So even like the most hardcore advocates of training to failure on like you can check them so easily like on their leg day. Like when you do a set of squats, are you getting pinned at the bottom on each set? You're doing 5 sets of squats to failure, and you're getting pinned at the bottom at the end of every single one of those sets. The leg press is coming crashing down on you because you train to true failure. You're getting stuck at the bottom. Like you're doing leg extensions until you literally cannot move your quads anymore. You're not truly training to failure there. And you probably shouldn't, because that would be silly. You would break a lot of barbells, and you might get kicked out of Zoo Health Club of Oviedo. People don't forget. To the owner of Zoo Health Club of Oviedo, when you were stuck in the parking lot and your car needed a jump, I came to rescue you. I pulled out the jumper cables and I helped you. And then a few weeks later, you told me to never return to your gym again. People don't forget.
So, but to answer this guy's question, I'll tell them what I do with my own training. And for some of my clients, I do something a little different. For some of them, I do stuff that's very similar to mine. But for myself, I don't escalate sets for most body parts. And it's kind of crazy, right? Like, this question was asked generally, but I treat different body parts differently. Crazy, right? Novel concept. That not every single muscle group would be the same, or that you might treat the same with your volume. But
I don't believe you.
But so I have, like, for most of my body parts, I have my intro week, right? Which is lower volume. And then after that, I go to my normal static volume that I just maintain for the block. Now, what I'll do is for periods of time, I will pick a body part, or maybe 2, maybe like 2 small body parts or 1 big body part. And I will escalate that volume over ranges. So like, let's say block 1, the range is 8 to 10, 11 sets, a very small increase over a training week. And I see how I handle that. Handle it well. Okay, next block, 10 to 12, 13, whatever. Next block, and I incrementally do that to see if I can find a range of volume, a higher range of volume that I can maintain without getting decrements in performance. And over that process, sort of reflect back on those various blocks of training, and looking at how well my load and rep progression went. Does that make sense?
Can I get a point of clarification?
Yeah.
When you say you reflect back on the block and it went well,
Yeah.
What kind of variables are you looking at to quantify it went well?
Yeah, dude. So my load increases are fairly fixed, right? So I'm looking at like how well my rep progression went, essentially.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, Dom, I think a lot of the training that you write is similar to Paul's. Do you have any kind of like differentiators between how you write your progression? And then Jay, I'm coming to you next.
Go to Jay. My dog's going nuts.
Charlie, how do you progress? Oh, you add sets? Oh, Charlie, you insane dog. Jay, what's your progression model look like?
It probably sounds fairly similar to what Paul said, but usually I'll kind of start on the low end. And then I'm paying really close attention to how the individual sort of increases repetitions over time. So with a specific load. So I don't really like to mess with load too much, and still, unless they like completely blow through. So if I give them, say, 100 pounds, and then all of a sudden they do like, 30 repetitions, that means it's time to increase load, because that we're getting a bit outside of what the Schoenfeld study said would be appropriate with regards to repetitions and hypertrophy. So then I might adjust load, and it really depends on the individual. Some people just tend to tolerate more volume, especially in specific body parts, and increasing volume from week to week. It's kind of a case-specific thing. I don't do well with increasing sets by volume, but that's also because I'm old, and I've already been through that. So I don't tolerate that very well. I basically have a set number of set number of sets that I'll perform per body part, and that's just over time of paying attention to progress. So I kind of have a set number, but if I get one of these young Thundercats, I can just handle. They have these joints that are made out of plastic still. They can do whatever they want. Those people, I may push them a little bit week to week, especially if their performance looks something like 100 pounds, 20, 19, 16. Then I go, okay, they can probably tolerate another set as opposed to increasing load, because, we all can probably agree, as you increase load, you also increase the chance of potential injury. So I would much rather increase set volume in some instances as opposed to load.
Dude,
I can dig that.
I really like one thing you said, and it reminded me of two things.
Only one. The rest was shit.
But no. That you start low, and that's something I try to get across to people, or like people that ask me advice on coaching or training. Is to start at the low end. Like, always start there, because if you just pick some random high number of sets, things don't go well. You have no idea where to go from there. Do I go up? Do I go down? But if you start low, there's only one direction you can go, right? Up.
Yeah.
And
remember when there was a semi-famous doctor whose name I will not bring up, but he said that you had to increase sets from meso to mesocycle somewhere between 10 and 20. And I think we probably all did that experiment on ourselves.
Yeah.
And probably either saw a lot of aches and pains and not a ton of progress when you're increasing
35.
every single body part.
Like,
to 35 sets.
35 sets of traps per week, baby.
I'll tell you what the problem is. Like, it worked okay for me. It didn't not work or whatever, but
it works.
I never
it does.
figured out. I never figured out the amount of volume I needed ever. I had no idea. I was just mindlessly going through these giant jumps in number of sets, and you don't learn anything about yourself. And that's why I say, when I do pick that one or two body parts that I escalate volume on, that I use very narrow ranges, 2 or 3 sets, 2, maybe 4 over a block, maybe. And sometimes I'm like, oh, that went well. Let me try it one more time before I go up, right? So I actually have some data, because what can you base off of just 4 weeks? And that actually takes me back to, you asked me what I reflect back on. There actually is a little more. Like, I like to do estimated 1R RMs, which are really big for me. And then along with the rep counts, sometimes it's just intuitive. Like, you can just look at numbers and RIR and see how they compare over previous weeks. But, and then I'll also sort of try my best to look at circumference measures, but that gets really hairy, right? Because did circumference go up because we just gained a little bit of fat? Did it go up for other reasons that we don't really talk about here on this podcast? And then did it go up, if it did go up and it was because of muscle, it probably wasn't what I was doing in just the last 2 to 4 weeks. That was the culmination and the realization of 8, 16, weeks of slowly, gradually adding small amounts of tissue. I said it, tissues.
Gross. Ugh. Dom, you got anything to add?
I like programming more frequency, so I'll keep stuff 2-3 sets for a while, but they'll just be doing it a bit more frequently, like tricep movements, bicep movements, rear delt movements, side, medial delt stuff. I like to program a bit more frequently, but I get some pushback from clients because a lot of people don't understand why we're programming the way we program, but then they start complaining that it's boring or they don't even feel like they're working out. So I've had to try to work with that. For some people, I'll do later in the meso, like week 3, week 4, like maybe 1 or 2 sets to like 2 to 3 RIR, and then give them a set at like 1 RIR, and then just let them like push a little bit harder that they want. But that was like one thing that I had to start trying to do, because people were just like, oh, my week 1 and 2 are so low in sets, like I don't even feel like I'm working out. And I'm like, well, maybe you're not training with intent.
Well, I mean, like, dude, I feel like that's a new client thing. But after you have clients for a while, I think they really come to appreciate intro weeks.
Yeah, for sure.
But getting over that first hurdle can be tough.
Yeah, one thing that I've dealt with clients too is like, they're like, I don't know how to combat I don't enjoy RIR training. I think I do better with failure training. But then like, I'll see how they claim they're training to failure, and I'm like, you're just doing RIR without saying you're doing RIR.
Well, and that's
just calling it something that you like better.
That's what I'm gonna do next time. Like somebody hits me with that as a new client, which I haven't gotten in a really long time, to be honest. Is I'm just gonna say, you know what? Fine, fuck it. Let's not make progress for the next 4 to 8 weeks. And I'm just going to give them the training log, and we're going to track it. And I'm going to be like, hey, watch this. We're going to do RIR training, and we're going to watch their numbers fucking skyrocket. I'm like, wow.
Paul, you'd be a great mother bird. Oh, you think you can fucking fly? You think you can fly? Well, see ya.
Kick you out of the nest. Good luck.
No, here's what you give them when they push back. I feel like I'm not doing enough. You say, okay, the next time you have a headache, how many Advil are you going to grab? They're going to be like, oh, I'm going to grab 2. You say, well, why didn't you grab 30? 30 would also do the job. 30 is so much of a cooler number than 2. Like all the normies, the normal people, gen pop losers, they take 2 Advil. You're a fucking hardcore bodybuilder. You take 30 of them bitches.
Lose the headache,
that's insane.
get a liver ache.
Yeah. Same thing with training. If you can do less, why not just do less for as long as possible? Howdy, Gifted Gang. We hope you're enjoying the episode so far. If you've been thinking about joining the Gifted Performance team but not sure one-on-one coaching is right for you, you should give the Gifted Express a try. The Gifted Express is our automated coaching feature that provides training guidance for bodybuilders, Olympic weightlifters, powerlifters, and lifestyle clients. For only $1 a day, you can get constantly varied, always progressed training. Sign up today by clicking the link in the show notes below. Now back to today's show. So here's another question that I think all of us have gotten some. It's funny to see people come around on this one. Let's just say we were here on the tempo shit before everybody else was. Everyone was talking shit about tempo. At 11.lifts asks, do you use tempo work on the control of the movement technique? It's an interestingly worded question. My interpretation of it is, do you use tempo to teach people movement technique? Is that exclusive?
I think it's, do you use tempo to help somebody work on how they can control it?
Dude, you guys got this all fucked up. You know that part of the movement that you don't control at all?
All of it?
You just fucking
start to finish? All right, so do you use tempo to work on basically movement technique, or are there other reasons that you might use tempo in your programming? Like tempo 100% definitely helps you improve your technique. Let's put that out there to start with. Moving slower will help your dumb brain learn how to move correctly. What are the other applications of tempo in hypertrophy training?
Okay.
For first off, the movement technique, like you said, and then I think there's pretty good literature that shows different motor units activating in different parts of a movement. So if we want to kind of emphasize on like strengthening a lengthened position and helping recruit more fibers for that, we'd put, more emphasis on a negative, because we know that motor units, it's not just A to B, they activate different parts of the movement. So that's why we can utilize tempos for that. I think I think that control goes a little bit further than just getting movement technique down. I think adding tempo in for, just teaching somebody how to train with tempo makes their non-tempo assigned movements a lot better too. Because I'm to the point where I'm making my training, I'm not even putting tempos down because I just do it. I just do tempos now because I've gotten so used to it. And I think it's good too for people to, even like lateral raises and just teaching them to hold for a second and not just, flap their arms like wings.
It gets people to pay attention to parts of the lift that they might have overlooked before.
Yeah.
I like to use it for, sorry, go ahead.
No, you can go. I talk too much.
Very true.
I think this is no disrespect to any specific competitors at all, but usually there's a specific division in which their lower body is often not judged as much as their
men's bikini.
Right. So, and what I've noticed is those competitors typically don't enjoy leg training. So to give them a structure within their program that involves increasing load from week to week, they tend to be, that's when I get reports back of, this ache and pain is coming up, or this happens, or I missed this entire workout, or I cut it short because I had to do this other thing, or those excuses tend to come right around that leg day. So often what I'll do is kind of cut the load by a good amount and then give them tempo. So then they kind of see it as, oh, it's not as intimidating as it was before because the load is less, but that they can get in some quality work at the same time. So it's a kind of a way of like my ninja in ninjing them. My ninja?
My ninja.
Can I use that? Yeah.
My ninjing.
My ninjing them into
What'd you call
getting
me?
in some quality.
Me and my ninjings.
Meninges, getting in some quality work, and keeping them away from the high load stuff, but still getting in some work. I don't know if that makes any sense at all, but
Sure.
I think that's my favorite application of tempo is it's like that rate limiter that like stops them from adding so much weight to the bar while still providing a good stimulus. So it's like
but even like tempo, like even with that, like, do you know how many times I've had to ask for a video and I'm like, dude, do you count?
Oh yeah.
Like, do you think that's actually 3 seconds?
1, 2, 3.
3 second eccentrics get faster from week to week. It's like week 4, a 3 second eccentric is just like, I'm going to drop this bar on my chest.
But I think we've all been there. Like in your head, you're like 3, 1, 2, 1, and you're like, oh god, just get me out of here. Like my legs are gonna fall off.
Yeah, that's the common feedback on the videos that people send me. It felt like 3 seconds. It looks like 1 second.
I'm sure it did.
Yeah. So I won't recap on any of that because y'all hit some good points. The only one that fresh comes out of my mind off the top of my head would be like longevity. And so yeah, and also sometimes using tempos and longer eccentrics and stuff can be therapeutic for certain, I guess, like nagging aches and injuries, little ones like elbow tendonitis and stuff, like tricep extensions and stuff like that. So yeah, just a way to kind of keep people training with a lighter load and then potentially just give little things time to feel better. Maybe even
I think Dr. Mike, the real Dr. Mike Taylor, the one and only Dr. Mike in our lives, I think he would agree with that. There's plenty of good research that shows that extended eccentrics are going to be beneficial for remodeling connective tissue, joints, tendons, ligaments, that kind of stuff.
Oh, and then one last thing, potentially mind-muscle connection as a little factor. It could be helpful for getting that for certain body parts, certain tempos, if used correctly.
This might be a little bro sciencey, but I kind of feel like it builds denser muscle.
Yeah, totally fake news.
That is garbage. That is horseshit, Tom. Jeez.
Should I leave? I should leave.
You don't have to leave. We'll remove you. So here's kind of a step forward on this question. The portion of the movement where you should be extending the tempo, are we looking at where do we see the biggest benefit in extending the tempo? Is it through the eccentric, the concentric, or the isometric? Are we trying to go slow during the lengthening, the shortening, or should we be adding like lengthy pauses
think it depends on the movement and what you're after. But I would say for most people, extending the time of the eccentric is probably most useful, because that is just an often overlooked part of the movement that people will rush through. Let the bar drop on a bench press, let the cable fly up on a lat pull down, stuff like that. Just drop the weight with a lateral raise. But there's definitely some utility in, pausing during the most shortened position for some movements, like a glute bridge at the top of the movement, or a hyperextension, fully locking out. Some people won't, may overlook a complete tricep lockout for like a tricep extension. So giving a little pause there, squeeze there, stuff like that.
Here's part 3 of this question that I just thought of. If I don't say it now, I'll forget it. Recently, I've seen some people talking about the benefit of fast concentrics in hypertrophy. Do you think that's something that holds water? So, a lot of the theory being that a higher velocity concentric contraction requires greater motor unit activation. Is that something that we should care about on a rep by rep basis?
No.
Or are we going to get to that high threshold motor unit recruitment just by training at an accurate proximity, or a sufficient proximity to failure, like a 2 or a 3 RIR?
Or even
what
sufficient
people
load.
don't understand is like just activating the high threshold motor units isn't enough. You have to activate, and I don't want to say fatigue. I think fatigue is a byproduct of doing your effective work and getting a good stimulus. But
fatigue is what takes you to those high threshold motor units.
Yeah, and so like if it was just a matter, because the problem is that you're not activating those high threshold units long enough, right? Otherwise, something like jumping, we could just jump. We're using maximal motor unit recruitment with minimal load, but that may not be an adequate hypertrophy stimulus to somebody, and it actually is definitely not for somebody who is well trained, right? You have to. So essentially, when movements begin to slow down, showing us that, hey, these high threshold motor units are fatigued, like that's what we're kind of after.
Yeah, because like we want that duration of that stimulus to be as long as the longer, almost the better, because there's more communication between, all your cells and receptors at that point.
The one thing I will say though is I do like to tell people, and you have to be careful, because for some movements and some body parts, maybe not the best idea, or not the best idea until you're very well like warmed up and in your groove. But I do like to tell people to lift with fast concentrics, because then it becomes a lot easier to rate your RIR and gauge how many you have left, and especially if you're referring back to film.
Oh, just based off like bar speed.
Yeah, if you're pressing as fast as you can,
you'll see it just drop off as your reps come up.
And you yourself will even notice, like, holy shit, that last rep was definitely slower, or this rep is definitely slower. This is probably where I want to cut it this week if that's my target, like 3 or 4 RIR or something.
I have seen a lot of people doing this with like one exercise that comes to mind is like hamstring curls. Saw someone doing hamstring curls with a very explosive concentric, and then trying to control that eccentric, that lengthening. It just looked challenging. And Paul, like you said, people think it's just about activating it, but Dom kind of clarified there, it's about the duration over which those are activated. It's an area under the curve more than an amplitude kind of issue. It's not something where you want it to go like that. You want it to come up and then stay sustained for a long period of time, so you have this like meaty piece under the curve. Yeah. That's where all the money is.
Now, you may, I would probably bet like most things end up being equal at the end of the day. Like if you just have all explosive reps, you may do fewer reps, and reach fatigue a little sooner, but like it probably totals a similar amount of total area under the curve versus like somebody that just used a more controlled pace, and most of their maximal high threshold recruitment was just at the later end of the set.
Yeah, I could see that being the case. All right, last question for the day, and it's another doozy, very wide open. Comes from Landon Rush. Landon asks, what is the role, or how big of a role does being a hyper responder or having elite genetics dictate like your end result, your end point? I think this is something that people talk about a lot. The people that you see up on the Olympia stage, the ones that you see winning the 100-meter dash at the Olympics, all of that. How much of a role do genetics play? And then how much of a role does being a hyper responder to training play? Number one thing that I would throw out there for the person who asked this question, or anyone who's really interested in this, is read the book The Sports Gene by Epstein, and you'll get a really, really lengthy look into genetics, responders to training, variables, things like that. But go ahead, folks.
Can I just say,
If you don't have good genetics, don't even bother.
no, but seriously, like the question is kind of funny, right? Like how much of a role does being a high responder play? Fucking everything. If you're a high responder, like you, right? Like that is everything. That the biggest difference, the biggest role that anything could possibly, you know?
I think it separates everybody from
when I
anything.
explain this question to people, I break it down into like 4 quadrants. So there is the very unfortunate short straw of all short straw quadrants, and that is low baseline, someone who's not very genetically gifted, and a low responder to training. They could train perfectly, as hard as possible, for the rest of their life, and probably never even reach mediocrity, which is very sad to think about. On the other side of that, across from that quadrant, is the low baseline, high responder. So not very genetically elite, not a good starting point, but they respond well to training. They're probably going to reach mediocre, maybe slightly above that, slightly above average. You then have your high baseline, low responder to training, the genetically very gifted, but they don't respond to training very well. These are the individuals that like will be your high school all-star. They'll make it to college, but that's when they'll kind of fizzle out. And then you've got the LeBron Jameses, the Tiger Woods, the Usain Bolts of the world, who are high baseline, high responder. They started genetically as elite as it gets, and they responded extremely well to training, and that's why they're the best to ever do it.
Maybe even drugs too.
Throw in some drugs there. Yeah. So when you throw PEDs into the equation, you can actually see some quadrant shifting as well. But even with probably all the PEDs in the world, and you'll see these guys at the local bodybuilding shows, the low baseline, low responders, you throw high PEDs into that quadrant, and they're like, cool, I won my class at this local show.
I will say I have seen some people go from like, wow, this isn't for you, to like the now elite of the elite. That is rare, but I've seen it, you know.
Name names, because I don't believe it.
I probably shouldn't name a name, but yeah, it was somebody that became a pro. And then, I mean, dude, what about I don't know this guy's full circle. What was the guy that got kidney disease?
Nick Tong?
No. He was pretty famous. Was it Evan? No, it wasn't Evan. He has that crazy transformation that everybody lost their minds over. He looked like an average competitor, and then he was competing at like the Olympia.
He has a kidney issue now?
Now he's fine. He's jacked again. He's sponsored under Animal.
Really?
Yeah. He doesn't compete
Fankhauser? Eric
Fankhauser?
Frankhauser?
There's a Canadian fellow.
I think he's
Antoine Vaillant?
No.
I think that's all of them. That's all.
Who's the guy
Frank
with the giant?
McGrath?
Frank McGraw with the giant forearms.
No, was it?
The real
It was
G6?
Evan Centopani, right?
Oh,
Didn't he
then
have
it was
like a
Evan.
wild transformation? He had a kidney thing for a while, right?
He had a
don't think
crazy
he had a-
transformation. I don't remember a kidney thing.
Yeah, he dropped out for a while. He got small from it. I don't know.
Evan's a cool
Something-
dude. I like Evan.
I don't know what his
Rory's
story
nice.
is, like where his transformation came from, but it was insane. Wasn't it?
Whoa.
Everybody
happened
is
there?
going to watch this and just be like, you have no idea what the fuck you're talking about.
I think Evan probably had some underlying good genetics there. I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know if we can chalk that one all up to.
You know what? I'm thinking of the
Enhancements.
wrong dude. I'm thinking of the total. It wasn't him. Fuck.
Okay.
I'm going to
makes
figure
more
that out
sense.
one of these days. Can we delete that part of the podcast? This is just embarrassing.
Hey guys, act like you didn't even hear that. Do you have like the Men in Black like memory wipe thing that we can use on these people? I don't remember who it was, but it was a coach at UCF, and I was talking with him about like speed training, and he told me if you want ponies, don't recruit donkeys. And for some reason, that has stuck with me for so long. He's like, if you want fast players, you got to recruit the fast kids. You don't go out and buy a donkey and take it to a horse race and be like, what the hell? Why isn't my donkey over here, Joe Burrow? Why isn't he winning this race? Like that one, Burrow, donkey. Yeah, pretty good right there.
It's like
pretty nice.
if you watch. So I mean, I've got a kid. And,
Credit to Jimmy on that.
So we watch. My kid's in soccer. Or he's tried a number of different things. And
He's a baller,
just-
by the way. I see him
He's
out
not
there. He's
bad.
weaving.
He's real fast. But you can see almost when they're like 3 years old, you can kind of see the kid where you're like, oh, that's the kid. Like that's the kid. You just watch his feet move and you're like, oh, he's just fast or he seems super coordinated. And it just goes to show like that starts to express itself sometimes pretty early. But sometimes you don't get it until late. I mean, sometimes you don't see kids that are, really athletic until they hit high school and they kind of get through that first sort of awkward phase and they get through, the growth spurt and all that stuff. And then they're the late bloomers. But genetics it's everything, and it's everything. And it expresses itself not just in athletics, but just in general, just anything in general. Just pick something and go, why is this person good at it? There's probably a good chance that it's mostly genetics and a lot of it's going to be work ethic. And
I think people really obsess. Do I have the genetics for it? Am I a hyper responder? Like, am I going to get, and it's like these, like that ship has set sail and you are on board and it's going wherever it wants to. And you are not in control of this anymore. So if your passion behind bodybuilding, weightlifting, whatever your endeavor is being curtailed or is rooted in like, do I have the genetics for this? You might want to pick something that you enjoy a little bit more, because I always tell people this, like, if you had the genetics to be one of those elites, you wouldn't be asking me if you had the genetics to be one of those elites. It would have made itself very, very apparent by now.
I think a lot of people mistake genetics for hyper responsive results. I think people think they have bad genetics because they're not hyper responsive. That doesn't mean their shape of their musculature or anything is poor genetically. They think because they lift, do whatever, they don't respond as fast, they think they have bad genetics.
Yeah, that genetics kind of dictates the starting point, right? Like we did the podcast with Coach Storms from UCF, and he was showing us a picture of like a 17-year-old. No, he wasn't 17. He was like 15. He was a high school freshman, and he was like 6'2", 235, and he was pretty lean. And the kid had never lifted a weight in his life. It's like that right there that's genetics. Now, how well that guy responds to training, which is probably going to be really well, is going to be the hyper or non-responder to training. The book, Sports Gene, has a chapter, I think it's the second chapter in the book. It's called A Tale of Two Jumpers. And it follows a gentleman from Sweden who trained for high jump his entire life, and then a Bahamian who trained for 6 months and broke his world record. So there's one guy who trained for 15 years to set the world record, a guy who trained for 16 months and broke his world record in basketball shoes. The guy who broke the world record in basketball shoes never jumped higher than he did that day. So he was just born with that ability, whereas the other individual slowly responded to training better and better and built it up. So there's kind of two camps that you can be in there.
I think, Ryan, you and I talked about this forever ago, kind of when you notice whether or not you have the genetics or not, you can kind of compare yourself to your friends. And a lot of us probably went to the gym the first time with other people. Like when I got started, it was like 4 of my buddies and me went to the Bally Total Fitness all together. And then I would just look at how everybody else was progressing and I'd be like, oh, so I put on like 20 pounds. How much you guys put on? They're like, oh, like 3 or 4. I'm like, oh, okay. This is weird. And I think it's that you can kind of compare yourself to everybody. It's weird because when you first get started, you are comparing yourself to everyone else. But at the end of the day, even that might be kind of a poor gauge of progress because who knows what's going on. Like all your friends might have terrible genetics. You might just have average genetics. So it's really tough to determine whether or not you're a hyper responder. But if you're 6'10" and you're 14 years old, genetics are on your side to either play basketball or be an offensive lineman. That's genetics. It doesn't matter if you're a hyper responder or not. You've got a giant skeleton. Congratulations. You're probably going to make millions.
Start hooping ASAP. I had that same thing when I was a kid, went to the gym. I had probably been training for like 2 years at this point. Shouldn't say kid. I think I was like 17 at the time. And I had a friend drop into the gym with me his first day ever. And I was like, oh, I'm a flex on him. And I pulled like a 355 deadlift. And he had never deadlifted before in his life. So I showed him what I thought at the time was the appropriate form, which, was horrible form. And he pulled like 385 or something. And I was like, oh, some people just got it a little bit different than I do. Some people. And I don't think.
Same.
I think that honestly might have been his only day of lifting in his life. He was just like, all right, I win. I'm going to go home. I'm done with this.
So I live with one of these weird people. And she competed one time, has ever competed one time, and won her pro card on her first shot out. So she won the novice. And this was, it's a drug tested show where they allow you to just walk in and get a pro card right off the bat. But she competed one time, got her pro card, beat a nice lady who at the time I would have been like, if she won, that would have been like, okay, that's cool. We got second. That's all right. Let's leave. So, she beats everybody and then never wants to do it again. She's like, oh, I'm good on that. So there's just these people out there. They're actually a bodybuilder's worst nightmare because you've been training for a really long time. You get hyped up for this show. You're prepared for it. And somebody shows up that this is just the thing they were built to do.
Yeah, and then I think, too, a lot of genetically blessed people rely way too much on it, and their work ethic is shit.
That is very common.
Like, I've experienced that with a lot of fucking genetically blessed people.
And you just
Isn't
want
that
to
going
shake
on right now?
Like,
With
do you know what you could be?
Isn't that going on right now with Keon, right? Can we assume that that's what's going on? He just has amazing genetics, but there might be some shortcomings there when it comes to work ethic or just
I wouldn't doubt it.
The mental fortitude to just stick to the plan. I've heard
I think they just rely way too much on what they were blessed with, and they think it can, outwork their poor work ethic.
All right, Landon, I hope that answers your question on hyper-responders and genetics. You, sir, have got both going for you, you big, handsome man. Folks, that's going to wrap up another Q&A episode of the GPP. It's been fun, as always. Guys, thanks for hanging out with me. If you are watching this video right now and you haven't done so already, drop that like, that comment, that subscribe. Let us know how much you love us. Paul just left. We'll see you on the next one. And stay gifted. Someone say bye for him.
Bye.